This museum is designed to remember what the soldier has done for our country.
I don't want anybody to ever forget what we went through in World War II.
They knew that they had to fight for something, and I think this is the thing that the museum really brings out.
Georgia Traveler is made possible in part by
Few places on earth match Georgia for natural beauty, and we plan to keep it that way. We're Georgia Power, a proud sponsor of public broadcasting. We're on so you can be. Georgia Power, a Southern company.
And by a grant from WETA and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
and by supporters of Georgia Public Broadcasting. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of Georgia Traveler, Remembering World War II.
In this episode, we'll be traveling Georgia, visiting museums that commemorate that historic event.
We are here at the Georgia Veterans Memorial State Park in Cordele. This site was established in 1946 for the purpose of honoring the many men and women who served during World War II. One of the keys to victory for the Allied forces during World War II was the battle over air supremacy. Now, one of the air assault groups that was given that task was the 8th Bomber Command, also known as the Mighty 8th.
Mighty 8th Air Force was, at the end of World War II, the world's mightiest air armada.
This was the first time that a war was fought in almost stratospheric altitudes.
The 8th Air Force lost a little over 10%. This is killed in action.
I don't want anybody to ever forget what we went through in World War II. So this museum is a great vehicle to keep that history alive.
Just outside Savannah in Pooler, Georgia, the history of World War II is alive at the Mighty 8th Air Force Museum.
The museum is 90,000 square feet. It honors every bomb group, every fighter group, and particularly all the support units associated with fighting the war. This museum is not an airplane museum. It definitely is not a war museum. We present the story of the people, the men and women of America.
And many of those men and women volunteer their time at the museum to share the story of their experience.
I was a B-24 pilot. Combat is really a lot of luck to not get hit with something. Either flak, the way we were flying, machine gun fire, and so on. We had 250,000 that were part of the air crews in the 8th Air Force.
I was a ball turret gunner on a B-17. There is no better ride than riding in a ball turret. You can't even see your own airplane. You know you're attached to it, but all you could see was the ground and the sky, and it's fantastic, until they started to shoot at it.
Not all stories shared here involve grave danger, but most are about how the experience of war changed lives.
I had a buddy that I was stationed with in 15th Air Force down in southern Italy. He was riding to a wave. He wrote his girlfriend and says, I've got a buddy that he doesn't get much mail. His parents are both dead, and says, why don't you have some of your girlfriends write him? About 8 of them wrote me, and I answered her letter, and that's how it got started.
In December of '44, Ed finished his 35 missions and came home. He asked me to marry him, and I said yes, and the 23rd of June we were married.
Veterans of the Mighty 8th can teach others about their experience through a special exhibit called the Mission Experience.
The first part is right here in this room. This is supposed to be a briefing room where the crews went in, were briefed on their mission and that they're about to fly. When this is finished, then they go through this door and see the ground crews getting the planes ready to go. And then when that's finished, you go into another room and you actually fly a mission. I'm talking to a fresh audience every time. My wife is tired of hearing my stories.
Surely visitors will never tire of hearing the incredible stories of these veterans.
We need to present this story, and we need to have the younger generations and older generations appreciate what was done by a unified Allied force during World War II against enemy of the worst kind.
We're plain vanilla guys who got called and got taught what we had to do to get the job done. And it was a mighty job to get done.
I want them to understand how the people in America felt about the war. They didn't want their husbands and sons and grandfathers to go over and get killed, but they knew that they had to fight for something. And I think this is the thing that the museum really brings out. This is what they did.
I want everybody that leaves this museum to say to themselves, my God, what a great experience.
A key element for the Allied forces' success on D-Day was the mission of the U.S. paratroopers, and many of these elite soldiers actually trained at Camp Toccoa in northeast Georgia. And the Currahee Military Museum honors all U.S. paratroopers, including those responsible for carrying out the strategic mission. Lieutenant Reed Pelfrey was the 14th American to step foot in Normandy on D-Day.
This aerial photo was taken on June the 6th, and this is Point du Hoc. You can see the bomb craters, the shell craters, and many of them are there still today.
Pelfrey was a paratrooper of the 101st Airborne, and the Currahee Military Museum in Toccoa, Georgia, honors soldiers like him who served their country with bravery and honor.
On D-Day, both the 501, the 506, along with the original TO&E regiment, the 502, jumped into Normandy. The 101st jumped in this area, the 502, 501, and the 506. We had planes going in all directions, and it was about a 20 square mile that people would drop.
The 506, known as Easy Company, originated here at Camp Toccoa and have since become the most famous of the paratroopers, featured in movies like The Dirty Dozen and more recently Saving Private Ryan and the 10-part miniseries Band of Brothers.
This is a board of Dick Winters, who commanded Easy Company during Normandy.
You know, it's a known fact that most soldiers become very close during war. A lot of them will trust a fellow soldier more than they would trust their own brother. So that was kind of how the terminology came up, Band of Brothers.
The average trooper, I would say, would be about 5'8". Average weight would be about 140. By the time you got all your equipment on you, especially if it was combat load, they'd go up to maybe 300 pounds.
Camp Toccoa at Currahee Mountain was the birthplace of the U.S. Paratrooper Training Program and the training ground for approximately 17,000 soldiers of the 501st, 506th, 511th, and 517th regiments.
E Company, 506 was the first regiment to come here in July of 1942. While they were here in Toccoa, they had to go through very, very strenuous and tedious and continuous physical activity. Part of it was running up Currahee Mountain, which was 3 miles up and 3 miles down.
You ran the mountain every morning before breakfast, and if you fouled up during training, you ran it again with full gear.
The centerpiece of this museum is a racing horse stable from England, which housed both Able and Easy Company prior to and after D-Day.
And when they left here, they were stationed 40 miles west of London in a town or a village called Alborn. And there were only 700 residents at that time. Well, all of a sudden they have about 10,000 soldiers to deal with, and some of them were still required to sleep in tents. So the stables were kind of the Taj Mahal of housing during World War II. And this particular stable that we have here was one that was never torn down over the years because the owners of it knew who stayed in that stable.
Displays here are paraphernalia that was memorabilia that we got out of, or they got out of the stalls when they were disassembling them to bring to the U.S. Don't forget my rats. They're named Able and Easy, because those were the two companies that slept in these stalls. Each item in here has a story behind it, and about all we can do is relate the stories behind it. Each year we have a reunion, and men from all of the units that trained here, plus veterans in the area and veterans from other regiments, come back.
They were close then, and they've been close for the last 60 years. It's just a bond that can't be broken.
Throughout history, the infantry has been the backbone of the U.S. military. The National Infantry Museum in Columbus, Georgia, pays tribute to the brave soldiers of World War II and to all infantry, both present and past. The infantry is the oldest and largest branch of the U.S. military. They are whose sacrifices have been among the greatest, the cost in blood and lives among the steepest, and whose acts of sometimes superhuman valor are among the most noteworthy.
The infantrymen are the U.S. Army's foot soldiers, and they can enter battle from many different ways. One is airborne, one is armored infantry, the other would be air assault, coming in by helicopters, fast roping to the ground.
More medals of honor have been awarded to the infantry than any other branch of the military, but that heroism comes at a price. Almost 80% of all casualties also come from the infantry.
This museum is designed to remember what they have done for our country, the sacrifices they have made, and to train the young soldiers that are trained here at Fort Benning to be infantrymen.
Each artifact comes from one of thousands of Americans that have answered the call of duty.
This is the oil painting that we had commissioned of Captain Bobby Brown at Aachen, Germany. Captain Brown was born in Dublin, Georgia, and he was sitting around the table with his family one day, and the father told him that there was just no room for Bobby anymore. He was going to have to get out and make his way in the world. And so he thumbed his way and walked to Columbus, Georgia, and he enlisted in the United States Army and came out to Fort Benning. General George S. Patton came on the post, and they were setting up the 2nd Armored Division, and he said, they're going to go to war, and I want to see if I can do a good job and be a good soldier. And on that fateful day at Normandy on the 6th of June, 1944, all the officers in his unit were either wounded or killed, and he was given another battlefield promotion to captain. And eventually he goes to Aachen, Germany, and this is what the painting depicts.
Each soldier was a flesh and blood American, with dreams and plans and loved ones that they might or might not see again. As you walk through the museum, you can't help but to think of the individuals that you knew, or in my case, never knew. My grandfather was with the 31st Infantry stationed in the Philippines during World War II. He was taken as a prisoner of war along with thousands of other soldiers. He would have worn a POW uniform like this one.
Each person has their own individual story or reason for coming to the museum. And probably the best thing I like to see is a young recruit leave here feeling that they're a part of something that's very big and something that's very necessary for our country to have.
The museum has long ago outgrown its space. Many artifacts cannot be displayed because of space limitations. There is the need to make space for new displays.
We're going to have a brand new museum, and we'll be able to influence a lot of people to realize what the soldier has done for our country in all our wars, and what he continues to do, and the sacrifice that is involved with any type of military service, be it peacetime or wartime.
Every war has its heroes. We must never forget them. Some were called heroes, others were called grunts, but all were members of a band of brothers who fought for this country and for the freedom and liberty we enjoy today. The values of duty, courage, and leadership are the hallmarks of the infantry and must be and will be preserved.
One haunting element of war is the capture and imprisonment of soldiers by enemy forces. These men and women are known as POWs, or prisoners of war. In Andersonville, Georgia, there's a museum that pays homage to all American POWs. Andersonville, Georgia is best known as a prisoner of war camp during the Civil War, where over 45,000 Union soldiers were kept, and nearly 13,000 of them died from disease, poor sanitation, malnutrition, overcrowding, or exposure. However, the Andersonville National Historic Site has since become the only National Park System area to serve as a memorial to all American prisoners of war, not just those in the Civil War.
The whole POW experience is a very personal story, and I think a lot of our visitors and kids too start to look at the whole idea of what would it be like if I was in this situation. And our visitors are always transformed by their visit, and they gain a tremendous appreciation and respect for our veterans and for the sacrifices that have been made for our freedom.
Tech Sergeant Don Scott of Kennesaw reflects on nearly 1 year as a World War II POW after his B-17 was shot down over Germany.
I unsnapped my parachute. Somebody hollered at me from behind. I turned around and looked, and there was a man in uniform with a rifle pointed at me. And I got up to him, and I looked at the side of his helmet, and I could see the emblem of a swastika. I knew I was not in friendly territory.
Months passed, the Russians closing in on the Germans from the east and the British from the west. So Scott was moved from prison camp to prison camp.
Sort of settled into a routine of prison life. The Germans made us go outside twice a day to line up and be counted. They want to make sure nobody was missing. One of the worst things about being a prisoner is not getting enough to eat. All you thought about was food.
The National Prisoner of War Museum gives visitors the opportunity to hear stories like Sergeant Scott's. This interactive experience helps you understand the conditions of POWs during every American war.
So the main thing that you have to worry about is survival.
We want the visitor to understand as much as possible that personal experience that you go through when everything is stripped away from you and it's just you and the enemy.
It includes relics, photographs, and video testimony from the heartbreak of capture to the experience of freedom.
I looked around at some of the houses nearby, and they had white flags hanging out the windows. We knew that we were free. We were liberated. The second day of May, and I celebrate the second day of May every year since then. The happiest day of my life.
Submarines have been part of military history as far back as the Civil War. But it was not until World War II that subs began to emerge as a powerful weapon in the Navy's arsenal. To honor and preserve the many contributions made by those who served on these vessels, a museum has been established in St. Mary's, highlighting the history of the submarine. Down on the waterfront in historic St. Mary's, you can learn about the role submarines have played throughout history, especially in World War II.
Our museum is divided into 3 areas. The first room you come into and the second room, both on the first floor, dealing with the World War II submarines and the diesel boats, let's say in the early 1900s. And top side, we have mainly nuclear items on display. And throughout the museum, we got about 30 display cases with different themes in them.
One theme that veterans hope that visitors appreciate is the importance of submarines in the Second World War.
We've been known as a silent service, and not much was publicized as such. And now we have it here. And a complete history of what occurred during World War II, all the various submarines that took part in it. We lost 52 of them. And this is something that the American people should be aware of. And if they ever have the opportunity, they would benefit by visiting here. Most of us who served in them, we were at the front lines before anyone else. And we carried the war to Japan, and we brought them to their knees.
If it hadn't been for the American submarines, the war would have lasted another 2 years. Instead of ending in 45, it would end in 47. The Admiral Nimitz says we are the first line of defense, the only line of offense, and that's the way we operated.
And the submarine force obviously has a lot of wonderful history to preserve and to get out to the public. Just to see the artifacts and just see the equipment. Now we have a periscope and a helm station, so they can sit down and take pictures and get a feeling like maybe they are in a submarine. And then we have equipment such as behind me here from the James K. Polk. It was a ballistic missile submarine, so there's a little bit of the modern time in here.
The museum itself is located near a modern submarine base, Kings Bay.
We kind of complement each other. People can't go on the sub base, and so they can't see nothing, and they can come here and get an idea. And there's so many different things that have happened that we've done together. There's the USS George Bancroft sail exhibit in front of the submarine base, and we're the ones that raised the money for that. So we've teamed up together on a few projects over the year to make things work.
The St. Mary's Submarine Museum also works to preserve the stories of veterans like George Shear and Bill Castleberry.
I entered submarine school in the summer of 1941 and completed my training and everything by just before World War II started. The Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. And in my submarine class, and me included, were transferred to Pearl Harbor. And I went to the Narwhal and went to sea my first patrol, and it was a rough one. Depth charged, you can't describe what it's like, except you're terrified.
1 out of 5 people you lost aboard a submarine in the submarine warfare. So that's a pretty heavy toll we paid for the freedom that people have today.
No examination of World War II would be complete without addressing the Holocaust. A permanent exhibit at the William Bremen Jewish Heritage Museum in Atlanta, Georgia, entitled The Absence of Humanity, The Holocaust Years, tells that difficult story using the pictures, memorabilia, and voices of those who survived and who made new lives in Georgia.
The Holocaust was not a natural disaster. It happened because all along the way, different groups of people made choices about what to believe, who to follow in terms of political leadership, how to treat people who were different than they were. We're a Jewish heritage museum, so we try to look at everything through the lens of the Jewish experience. The Holocaust Gallery is a mixture of very personal photographs, documents, memorabilia, video testimony from Holocaust survivors who made new lives for themselves in the Atlanta area.
Different privileges were taken away from people. First thing you felt was if mother or daddy had a job, their job was taken away from them. You're over the age of 6, I want you to wear a yellow star so I can identify you. Any way I can to make you less than a human being is what I'm going to do.
One of the things that I like to talk about in this gallery is this piece of fabric. I had seen countless individual stars, and it just never occurred to me. I just never thought about that this was how they came. This piece of fabric speaks to me of the industrialization of this whole period of history, because you can imagine it on a big roll, going in a factory, going through a printing press. The atmosphere in it is very architectural. It was designed by an Atlanta architect who is himself a child survivor of the Holocaust. And he used a number of architectural touches to create a particular ambiance in the gallery and to encourage visitors to not only look around at the walls, but to look up towards the ceiling and down towards the floor. Above us on the ceiling are portions of railroad track that once went into the Treblinka death camp. Ben Hirsch, the designer of this gallery, and I were in Washington at the Holocaust Museum's storage facility, and we saw a lot of these pieces of rail. And Ben said, "I want 2 of them." And I said to him, where are you going to put them? And he thought for a minute and he said, "I'm going to mount them on the ceiling, lined up with this large photo mural of the railway track going into Birkenau, the killing camp at Auschwitz, really." Okay. So I said to him, "But if you put them on the ceiling, they'll be upside down." And Ben thought for a minute and he said, "That's right, the entire world was upside down at this point." There's something for everybody here. The things that we're talking about, individual responsibility, respect for difference, the importance of community, are really universal in nature.
And that concludes this special episode of Georgia Traveler, Remembering World War II.
For more information, visit us on the web at www.gpb.org.
We hope you'll join us for the next episode of Georgia Traveler. Until then, I'm Phil Proctor.
I'm Keely Muse.
And I'm David Zelsky. Thanks for watching.
Georgia Traveler is made possible in part by
Few places on earth match Georgia for natural beauty, and we plan to keep it that way. We're Georgia Power, a proud sponsor of public broadcasting. We're on so you can be. Georgia Power, a Southern company.
And by a grant from WETA and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
And by supporters of Georgia Public Broadcasting. Thank you.
Georgia Traveler is produced in partnership with the Georgia Department of Economic Development and the Georgia Tourism Foundation.
This has been a production of Georgia Public Broadcasting.